https://www.steptoe.com/podcasts/the cyberlaw podcast-249.mp3. In this episode, I interview Chris Bing and Joel Schechtman about their remarkable stories covering the actions of what amount to U.S. cyber mercenary hackers. We spare a moment of sympathy for one of those hackers, Laurie Strode, who managed to go from hiring Edward Snowden to hacking for the UAE in the space of a few years. In the news, I ask my partner Phil Kinda whether the $29 million Yahoo breach settlement is a new front-end breach derivative litigation or a black swan. He says it's more of a red herring, and explains why. This week in Black Ops, I asked Nate Jones to comment on the tradecraft used in an apparent effort to smear Citizen Lab for its reports on NSO. My take: this feels a lot like what BlackCube did for Harvey Weinstein, except that this was the budget version. The Russians are so far from being shamed for their hacking that now they're faking it. Megan Reese notes Special Counsel Mueller's recent claim that Russians are leaking discovery materials and pretending they came from a hack of the counsel's office. We are reminded of the Russians' recent unveiling of a remarkably adroit robot that turned out to be a man in a robot suit. Maury Shank and I discuss Google's latest imitation of Apple's law enforcement lockout feature and its claim that hurting law enforcement was unintended side effect. Maury also notes the flap over a flaw in Apple's FaceTime that allows for eavesdropping. Predictably, New York State is investigating. And in possibly related news, Apple went out of its way to publicly embarrass Facebook and Google over their use of corporate certificates to sideload apps that recorded the browsing habits of paid volunteers. Quick hits this week in Dogs Biting Men. Ukraine says Russia is trying to disrupt its upcoming election, and the Pentagon is reportedly failing to stay ahead of cyber threats. Meghan covers the first on Nate II. I offer 1.5 cheers for Japan's pioneering and mildly intrusive survey of bot-vulnerable IoT devices. Finally, Epic et al. Are calling on FTC to impose a $2 billion fine, structural changes, and more on Facebook, claiming that the algorithmic bias of the Facebook newsfeed reflects a predominantly Anglo-male worldview. If still need evidence that privacy law is the legal equivalent of a Twitter mob, an always-ready tool for punishing unpopular views, Epic's filing should be all you need. Download the 249th episode, MP3. You can subscribe to the Cyberlaw podcast using iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, Pocket Casts, or our RSS feed. As always, the Cyberlaw podcast is open to feedback. Be sure to engage with @Stuart Baker on Twitter. Send your questions, comments, and suggestions for topics or interviewees to cyberlawpodcast@steptoe.com. Remember, if your suggested guest appears on the show, we will send you a highly coveted Cyberlaw podcast mug. The views expressed in this podcast are those of the speakers and do not reflect the opinions of the firm.